The first person Dorothy meets along the way is the Scarecrow.
Early film versions were produced in 1910 and 1925, but the MGM classic movie starring Judy Garland as Dorothy was produced in 1939. This version included many changes that largely obscured the monetary reform symbology. Dorothy's silver slippers were changed to ruby slippers to take advantage of the new Technicolor process.
Now, with the history of money in America laid out, let's take a look at the Wizard of Oz to see if these symbols make sense.
Well, the principal and most powerful symbolic reference is, of course, the yellow brick road and the silver slippers. In the book version of The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's slippers are made of silver, as opposed to in the film version where Dorothy's slippers are made of ruby. You take away the silver slippers on the gold or yellow brick road, and all of the other symbolism tends to be lost.
The original populist solution was government-issued money called greenbacks. But the greenbacker movement had failed, so the populists had switched to expanding the money supply with government-issued silver coins. The underlying dispute, however, was not what money was made of, but who should issue it, private bankers or the people themselves through their representative government.
The first person Dorothy meets along the way is the Scarecrow, representing the supposedly ignorant Western farmer. Although he thinks he doesn't have a brain, the Scarecrow proves to be very clever at figuring things out on the trek to Washington.
And this was Baum's way, perhaps, of saying that the farmer, in fact, did understand the basics of economics, and that an expansion of currency was, in fact, a legitimate way of improving the condition not only of the farmer, but of the economy as a whole.
Next, Dorothy and the Scarecrow meet with the Tin Woodman, Baum's symbol for the factory worker.
And what he needed was some oil or liquidity. He needed the liquidity of more money in the system.
As Professor Hugh Rockoff of Rutgers University put it in his 1990 article in the Journal of Political Economy,
the Tin Woodman had joined the ranks of those unemployed in the Depression of the 1890s, a victim of the unwillingness of the Eastern gold bugs to countenance an increase in the stock of money through the addition of silver.
And then there was the Lion, who represented William Jennings Bryan. Bryan was actually called the Lion of the Silver Movement. He was the leader.
Bryan was considered a coward because after his loss in 1896, he backed away from the Free Silver movement. According to Professor Rockoff,
the last character to join the group is the Cowardly Lion. This is Bryan himself. The sequence is not accidental. Baum is following history and suggesting that the movement was started first by the Western farmers, was joined by the working man, and then, once it was well underway, was joined by Bryan. The Roaring Lion is a good choice for one of the greatest American orators.
So off go the four unlikely companions, headed for Oz along the dangerous yellow brick road in hopes that a powerful wizard will grant their requests. Some experts view this as symbolic of the very first march on Washington, that of Coxey's army in 1894, to try to break the Depression.
Jacob Coxey was a successful businessman who led a march from the Midwest to Washington, D.C. to seek redress for the economic plight of millions at the time who were suffering during the crisis of the Depression of 1893. He marched with a so-called industrial army. These were just unemployed men. So this trek is often seen as inspiration behind Dorothy and her group's trek to the Emerald City to seek redress from the Oz, or the President of the United States. Coxey was hoping to meet with President Cleveland. However, he was arrested for trespassing, jailed, and his movement was dispersed.
Coxey was a greenbacker, and his idea was simple. The federal government should build public works and pay for them by printing money. At the time, the idea seemed to be the wildest kind of extremism, but given unemployment of 18.4%, few modern economists would be prepared to dismiss such a proposal out of hand.
On the trek to Oz, The Cowardly Lion falls asleep in a field of poppies. But why poppies?
The poppies were representative of the opium wars that Bryan was opposed to.
Poppies are a source of opium, and falling asleep in the field of poppies symbolizes the populist fear that Bryan would fall asleep in the midst of these new issues.
The lion was rescued from this field where he was sleeping by a bunch of little field mice who, it said in the book, alone, of course, they wouldn't have been able to move this giant lion, but when they all got together, they were able to move him together. So this was like an excellent image of the populist movement, how a lot of people who had no power in themselves or alone, if they knew the direction in which they wanted to go, could move mountains, could actually have a major impact. There's a great deal of symbolism in the book that was lost in the movie, that there's just so much of it that there's no way that it couldn't have been reflective of this monetary reform movement. And some of it is just very pointed, like it couldn't mean anything else. For instance, there's one passage when they get to Oz and she's shown to her room in the palace, she goes through 7 passages and up 3 flights of stairs. Well, it just means nothing unless it means the crime of 73, which to all populists meant that statute which had revoked the ability of the people to bring their own silver to the mint.
It is not surprising that the layout of the Emerald Palace should reflect the numbers 7 and 3. The crime of 73 was a crucial event in populist monetary history.
The 2 wicked witches were the East and the West. The 2 banking powers at that time were Rockefeller and Morgan. And J.P. Morgan headed the Wall Street bankers in New York and ultimately got his funding from Europe.
The Wicked Witch of the West could represent the Rockefeller interest. Based in Cleveland, based in the Midwest, Rockefeller was dominant in the West and Morgan was dominant in the East.
So when Dorothy first lands in her house and kills the witch, she gets the slippers, which are the power of the witch.
They're no use to you. Give them back to me. Give them back.
Keep tight inside of them. Their magic must be very powerful, or she wouldn't want them so badly.
So the power of the witch is the power to create money. Dorothy doesn't realize that she now has that power on her own feet, the power to create money.
Dorothy and her troop are then told that they must go kill the Wicked Witch of the West.
Bring me the broomstick of the Witch of the West.
But if we do that, we'll have to kill her to get it.
She hurls near-biblical plagues at the group, wolves and crows and black bees, all of which they defeat. Finally, she is forced to use her golden cap, another symbol of the gold standard, to call the winged monkeys, which capture the group. Dorothy eventually kills the witch by pouring a bucket of water on her, suggesting the liquidity that silver money would add to the economy, breaking the stranglehold of the bankers' gold money system.
With additional liquidity, the economic fortunes of those people can be improved.
People wanted government-issued money, silver in this case. The banks had forced America onto a gold money standard. Then they could cause a depression anytime they wanted to, merely by reducing the supply of gold money.
When they return victorious to the wizard, Dorothy is asked to sew the wizard's getaway balloon out of green cloth. Then the wizard accidentally leaves without her. Fortunately, Dorothy is able to seek out Glinda, the good witch of the South.
Oh, will you help me? Can you help me?
Dorothy is then told that the power to solve her problems has been with her all along. She only needs to click the heels of her silver shoes together 3 times. Like Dorothy, America itself had the power to solve its problems simply by expanding the money supply, government-issued silver money. When Dorothy finally gets back to Auntie Em and Uncle Henry in Kansas, she finds that the silver shoes have fallen off her feet, just as the silver issue was vanishing in the late 1890s.
And Baum was right. The silver cause would become a distant memory once the United States became firmly committed to the gold standard with the passage of the Gold Standard Act in 1900. The same year, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was published.
L. Frank Baum never admitted embedding the symbols of monetary reform in The Wizard of Oz. Consequently, some fans vehemently deny that there is any connection.
However, the period immediately after the book's release may offer some helpful clues regarding his motives. References to current affairs appear in a number of Baum's later works. In 1901, Baum worked on a comic opera entitled The Octopus or the Title Trust. This was while he was still trying to break away from writing any additional Oz books. However, the public pressure became too great as The Wizard of Oz continued to grow in popularity. Eventually, Baum appeared to lose all interest in politics as he became wealthy from having written what would become the most popular children's story in history.